Good evening, everyone. We are on episode 12 of Restitching the Tapestry. Ari, episode 12.
Oh my God, we're already there.
Just prepare yourselves, everyone, because Ari and I are going to react as dramatically as possible every time we hit a new episode because it's just, we
So
revel.
mind-blowing.
Yeah, like we revel over all the ground that we've covered so far because it's been so fun and we've really enjoyed doing it. So that's always nice. Let's see, we have David tuning in, Arpy, we have Taylor. Hello, dear friends. It's good to see
Hello,
you.
Taylor.
Uh, so I'm gonna wait another extra minute or so people can tune in. So I think while we wait, we could just let everybody know how we've been doing. So Ari, how have you been doing lately?
I've been doing pretty good. Looking forward to tonight's episode. I was actually a little nervous about tonight's episode because it's such a monster of a topic. But I think that once we start sinking our teeth into the issues, we will actually we actually have a lot of really good things to say.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah, like I also was a little bit worried about it because it's such a giant topic and I really enjoy this show because I do feel that we challenge ourselves. And I mean, there are situations where some of this information that we research or are exposed to is very, I don't know, like it helps us learn something new, right? Because I know I have learned a lot of new things and will probably continue to do so. But I nerd out about that type of thing. So let's see. David had exams last week. Sorry that you missed us. Taylor said, you guys will be great background to my morning sickness session. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh
I hope you
no.
I hope it passes. David, monster of a topic. I take it we're not talking about kaiju. No, not tonight. Although we could talk about representation of military in kaiju movies at some point. Episode idea. I love this.
I feel like that's what we talked about a couple episodes ago already.
We did kind of touch on it. Like, I will let everyone know that Ari and I have been doing a lot of planning, and we currently have 21 episodes planned out all the way up until October 22nd. So we got stuff ready to go. So this is good. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to get us started by reading our show's mission statement. So many witness different atrocities, whether they're large or small, which often fray the social fabric around us. And much of the time, many may feel powerless and know not how to address such things. In light of that, this fray has gotten worse with the rise of social media being able for all of us to share in like this collective trauma as it goes viral, and we kind of like just again share in like a collective grief and outrage as it happens in real time. So that begs the question of what can we do to mend communities that have seen considerable tragedy, most of which is caused by privileged groups who don't want to be accountable for their involvement. So, through this show, our goal is to restitch the tapestry through conversation, education, creativity, and action. So, tonight's episode is about the military industrial complex, which is something that we've touched on numerous times in past episodes because we're always like commenting on it. And then we're like, we need to do an episode about that. Like, we need, so finally, now that we're on to episode 12, we're getting around to that. Before we go any further, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the Democratic National Convention. Um, my partner and I, over the past few nights, have been watching the Democratic National Convention. And like last night, I was having this moment where I was crying while watching it. Because any chance to be dramatic, I try to take it as much as possible. But I think there was a lot of optimism. And I think right now that was very significant considering we're in a pandemic, considering there is a lot of social stresses, a lot of social violence, and even like acts of violence happening against groups of people in our country. And last night, the highlight of the evening was vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris speaking, and it was very moving listening to her talk about her upbringing, how her parents are African American and Indian, and it was really beautiful seeing her speak with determination, with poise, and with a strength that I think we haven't seen in a long time. So I like, if you have not had a chance to see those speeches or anything, I would recommend going back and watching them. Even former President Obama also spoke. So it was very, very significant. So I would definitely check it out if you get a chance. So anyway, um, so let's talk about the military industrial complex, Ari. So I think the first thing that we should probably do is at least define what it is.
Yeah, so the business of war and commercialism of war has always been around. You always need weapons, you need uniforms, you need bullets, you need tanks. But the term military industrial complex didn't come into being until Eisenhower's farewell speech in 1961. To quote the speech, he said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex. The potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." So basically, he was saying that, like, we have to really guard against, like, this problem of defense and commercialism and the military power, this trifecta of protecting commercial interests and the defense budget and the military power, because it is such a such a problem, and that it can be so problematic for a country that it can cause problems for a lot of different things and a lot of different people. And he was warning against this complex, this giant scale thing that was starting to grow, and this things that he was starting to see. And he had kind of done his farewell speech as he was leaving office about this. And this is just as Vietnam is starting to kind of take off, even though Vietnam had been kind of taking place for several years before that. But it was starting to really kind of take off more and become more of a problem. Um, so and the thing with the military industrial complex is it affects um, it's more of like prolonged war without end. That's kind of one of the parts of the military industrial complex, is that you see a war and that there's no end to it. Like the Vietnam War, is that it was just such a long, prolonged invasion, and that there wasn't a real like end to it. We just sort of like left.
Hmm.
But we didn't really end anything. It just didn't it didn't really like, and then we see it later on with Afghanistan and Iraq uh and other countries, is that we have this like military presence, and I'll talk about that more later. But um that's part of the military industrial complex, is that uh it affects the world in such ways like that. But it's this prolonged war machine that keeps grinding out war to make a profit.
Right. It's because I was doing a little bit of research a couple days ago for our episode, and kind of looking at the historical context behind the military industrial complex, I was looking at the two world wars, World War One taking place in the very early 20th century, and then World War Two taking place right after the Great Depression. And there were like common like thought processes behind war being good for business, being good for the economy, because if you're producing things for said war, then you are kind of putting something back into the economy, whether it be jobs or revenue or like like needed resources that can be imported or exported. And
Well, it's not just World War One and World War Two. It's also the Revolutionary War. It's
mhm,
also the Civil War. I mean, anytime we have a war, there's stuff that's being created for the necessity of war,
mhm,
and it's bolstering the economy because it creates jobs. It creates a necessity of war. I mean, during the Civil War, though they didn't have the resources always necessary, the North had a great had advantages because they were heavily industrialized, and they had benefits during that war. They just needed to get the supplies they needed, and that's kind of why they won the war, is because they once they got the raw materials that they needed, they were able to really kind of
kind of
overcome themselves.
outproduce, yeah, like outproduce the opposing forces. Yeah.
Pretty
Like
much, yeah.
I think like so my only question is, because I mean, didn't really hear of the term military industrial complex until that speech that you referenced.
Hmm.
So in a way, like at that point in history, which was after World War II, at that point, people started recognizing more so the fact that the military is this money generating machine. And my big question is, before that, did people acknowledge it and glorify it to the same degree that they do today?
I I don't know if they were glorifying it, but definitely during World War II, there was definitely a heavy push towards private enterprise, um, making for big business. So I would say in World War II it was definitely a thing. Maybe World War One, probably the Civil War as well. Uh, but it's gotten progressively more so as wars have gone on.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I
I like I personally think it was, and this is just based on the research I've looked at over the years, or the accounts that I've seen over the years. I really felt like there was a huge turning point after the Great Depression when World War II started picking up, and that was in a way the catalyst that brought many powers across the world out of their depressions. And I mean, if you're on like if you were on like any type of like end of it where you had like resources to barter with, or if you were a significant power with influence, right? But because if you look at the propaganda back then, like it was largely focused on advertising for the war. Like the war almost became like something that was being promoted.
Mhm.
And I wish, like, one thing I wish we could do for these streams is like bring in photos. I'll have to research to see if I can like do like that type of thing, because I think it would be helpful to look at like different examples of those types of things. But like that to me was the turning point, because it became I mean, I feel like there have been examples in the past where war has been like a rallying cry, right? But I felt like during that time it became even more so one, because not only was the depression in the back of everyone's minds, but the potential hope for us to become more involved in the world in the grand scheme of things. Because truthfully, up until World War I and World War II, we hadn't had a considerable amount of involvement when it came to large, sweeping things happening on the world stage, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So let's see.
David said, I think also with how commercialism and enterprise has changed post World War II made it very difficult level of MIC, especially with a more advanced weaponry and a more advanced society. Um, yeah, I think that World War II was kind of a changing point. It definitely we drifted more towards the military industrial complex with World War II just because we needed tanks, we needed bombers, we needed more advanced machinery in World War II, and we really heavily drifted towards that. And then we had the Vietnam War, which was just like an explosion of
Oh
just
yeah.
needing the advancements of war. We needed napalm, and we needed, but World War II was definitely a turning point for sure with the atomic bomb and bombs in general, and uh, just just the vestiges of war.
Well, not to mention, I really felt like there was very convenient justification that people were trying to create back then. And because, I mean, if we look at um, what happened to Japan during World War II, I felt like the use of force that we used was a convenient justification for those back then in power making those decisions, because coming off from the Depression, moving into a more industrialized type of warfare, in a way, people became desensitized to the advancement of everything, and I
Well,
don't.
because it was part of that patriotism that it was good for America because Japan had attacked America, so we were just doing what was good for America by protecting ourselves with the military. So
Mhm,
we were just doing our part, and we were collecting tin, and we were, sending the women off to work in the factories to create the weapons of war. We were doing our part, getting all together, being part of this machine to create the weapons of war. Rosie the Riveter, I'm gonna do my part. Come together. Uncle Sam, do that part for America. Join in, do your part for America, join in and be part of that military industrial complex and create the machines of war and save America, kick those Nazis to the curb. Let's
mhm,
get those Japs and save the world from the bad guys, us versus them. And because there's real evil out there and we've got to stop them.
right.
And and it was necessary in World War II because they were doing horrific things. They were killing off the Jews, and they were putting them in internment camps. But we were also putting Japanese people in internment camps.
Oh, yeah.
Um, uh, but they were doing things in Europe that were wrong and that needed to be stopped. Um,
And even, Japan was doing some very troubling things across China
but
and
did we
the
need
South
to
Pacific, yeah.
did we need to nuke them? I mean,
Right, exactly. And see,
it's
in during World War One, the United States, if memory serves me correctly, it's been a while since I've studied World War One, but the United States was very hesitant to involve itself in anything. And
But
after we did get involved, it was a pretty significant turning point.
but they wanted to end the war quickly, and
Right.
so nuclear weapons were, I mean,
In a
that
way,
was
what
what did it.
arguably the most effective means at that time they justified. Um, but of course, way more destructive and with way more lingering, like lethal effects, even onward from there. So
But it
it's
changed the world in so many different ways. I mean,
mhm.
good and bad.
Well, the use of nuclear weapons during World War II is very much um, what set the Cold War in motion as well. Um,
And what set us into the nuclear age of, like, the baby boom generation and all sorts of things. I can't even begin to get into what happened after. I mean, it's it's intense, the spiraling effect of using nuclear weapons, but yeah.
right, right.
We're going down a rabbit hole and we're getting far off topic here.
So Taylor says, I will forever take issue with the direct comparison of Holocaust to Japanese internment. Neither was justified, but that comparison denotes the horror or demotes the horror of the Holocaust. And that's an excellent point. Um, and I apologize if I made that
Yeah,
comparison.
sorry. It's just
Um, I think we were just trying to note like the fact that there were different examples of internment. Of course, there were different degrees of what that internment led to, and different degrees of what motivated those instances of internment, if that makes sense. So I hope that clarifies a little bit better. It was difficult because an intense amount of money had been used in the Manhattan Project, and interestingly, many scientists weren't crazy about the idea. Exactly. Um, the Japanese could have continued the war. Millions of Japanese would have died in an invasion. The country could be split the way Korea is today, too. Yeah, there could have been many different alternatives to what had actually happened. And I do like, I mean, many scientists weren't crazy about the idea, because I remember reading a lot about that, where like scientists were very much aware of the fact that they were creating weapons of mass destruction. I mean, look, I mean, if we bring Godzilla into this, because I'm going to at any chance that I possibly can, that story itself is an example of like nuclear horror being turned into like this metaphor in the form of this monster, right? And in that original film, the main character was burdened by creating a weapon of mass destruction. So the story kind of used what had happened in those events to kind of illustrate another example of such things. So it really it really showcased the frightening power. I'm talking about World War II now. It showcased the frightening power of how, when everyone comes together, when all the parts are working for one goal, there can be advancement, but some of that advancement has the potential of going too far if people aren't holding themselves accountable or looking at it from a human perspective. I just went off on a tangent.
it's true. It's
What
all
else is
right.
new?
So let's come back to topic. So I have some discussion questions. Uh,
Excellent.
my first discussion question is, how does the military-industrial complex affect the small-scale person-to-person? And I think there's several reasons. Do you have some that you want to discuss?
Well, I think it affects I mean, I think it affects people like individually, because I mean, and I kind of created a list later on in our little document, but I know the draft is an example. Um, because in very many ways, like the draft, like requiring people to sign up for the draft when they were registering to vote, I think it was like that was our way, or the country's way of saying, well, yes, it is your civic duty to vote, but it could also be your civic duty to serve
Mhm.
if the time arose. I think that's an example. Taylor said the military industrial complex affects me because my husband rants about it when I'm trying to sleep.
Um, so, yeah, also, in times of peace, they, or most times they will go into, low income schools, and they, like my sister, we were in a lower income school, and they'll offer VA benefits, like they'll offer the free college, and if you don't have scholarship, you know prospects, uh, having the military pay for your college is a great way of getting college paid for. So you'll sign up for the military and do your 4 years. And yeah, my sister did the military. She joined the Marine Corps. Um, but it doesn't come without its costs, obviously. I mean, you could get killed serving. You could be horribly injured. You could have a lot of terrible things happen to you. You could get PTSD or, um, but yeah, they a lot of bad things could happen to you when you're in the military. But it's part of that complex where they will always try to get you to enlist, and they will set themselves firmly up in those high schools, and they will definitely try to get you to enlist, and they'll do everything they can to like ingratiate themselves with young people as like the military is cool and the military is great, and like you gotta enlist and like be one of the cool like physique
Mhm.
guys.
Or
And
to romanticize the military in some way.
like
Like Taylor mentions the Navy used to set up during lunch and challenge the farm boys to pull up contests to impress the girls. They used to do that at my school too. I remember that very vividly. And like what another thing that because I remember was I in middle school or high school when this I think it was high school where like we had representatives from the military come into one of our classes, and each of them had like a presentation. They talked about like each branch of the military. I mean, it was kind of interesting because we got to learn a lot about like the different branches and everything. But at the end, there was kind of like this wrap up where one of this was back in 2006 and 2007 when the economy was not doing as well. Okay, so we were like kind of veering toward 2008 where we had that like um,
market
that
crash.
economic crash, right? And people were like, this person was saying at the end of their presentation that the likelihood of you finding a job at the end of your high school career is very unlikely. So why not enlist? Because it will at least ensure that you will have a future and not be homeless or not have worth, or like literally these words were being used.
Oh
And I could
man.
tell, like, because I like, of course, when I was listening to this, I was just like, what the hell is happening? But I was like looking at other people's facial expressions, and I could tell that some people were very much affected by those words. Like they were really thinking about it. They were questioning like their situation. And I know like there were often instances where like individuals would approach, say, like those who knew were in a vulnerable place, or those who knew that they may have needed an escape from some, say, like difficult home situation, they would use those types of vulnerable people as a means to garner enlistment, right? And I thought, like I don't know whether I should say that that's right or wrong. Like, I don't really like it, it's just unfathomable to me when thinking of the fact that that is connected to the military industrial complex, because at the end of the day, it does reduce people to being a number or a statistic, despite what their circumstances might be. So now, if like a person is consciously making the choice, like I want to join because I want to create a career, I want to better myself, and I also want to like protect my country at the same time, like at least there is some conscious motivating factor. Whereas if someone is preying on vulnerable people, as Taylor just mentioned, preying on the fear of youth, like that to me is very much scary and wrong. Yes. Yep.
I just feel like if we had universal basic income, like all of the problems with the military industrial complex would go away, and we
Mhm.
wouldn't have people signing up for the military just to get free college,
Oh yeah, if people had
it would
better
disappear.
access to education too, like that's another huge thing, because one talking point that we always hear is, "Oh, well, you'll get free education. Like you won't be in debt like your friends are." Like that one person, because I went with my one of my friends to a recruiter, and that is exactly what they said. They were like, "Well, you're not going to be in debt, like this person, like so you won't have that burden. You won't be putting that burden on you or your family." And I think when you start reframing it like that, and when you start involving people you care about, that again, that to me is also preying on a vulnerability of sorts, right? Because in America, we're taught, like, don't be a burden on other people, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, do what you need to do to be successful and live the American dream, right? So, like, to me, that's just an example of both of those things kind of malforming into something different. I'm going in a lot of tangents tonight.
David, don't even get me started about expensive college. We're going to talk about college as a business.
Oh god, yeah, I think that's our next episode, so enjoy that when, when we get to that. Um, Taylor says, and this is a very interesting point, "I'm sure there are statistics about minorities joining disproportionately due to money problems and therefore dying disproportionately." Yes. I've also seen accounts and statistics. I don't have the statistics with me at the moment, but of LGBTQ plus, which, I mean, they're a minority, of course, individuals joining to escape um, violent situations or homelessness. And I think it's good that like enlisting does give them a safe place, or a roof, or even a purpose. However, if they are approached and if those vulnerabilities are directly used, I think, as kind of like a recruitment spiel, like I think that's when it crosses something that shouldn't be crossed.
Well, it was a haven for the trans community for a while, but they just ousted the trans community from the military, so they're not able to use the military as a haven anymore to make money and go to college and better themselves. So, I mean, that
Right.
that isn't a purpose anymore. So, I feel like you know, they've lost that resource. Unfortunately, we've talked about this as before.
Yeah. Sorry, I was reading the comments. I think the military industrial complex would operate independently still. There are too many resources, interest, defense systems, global investments at stake. Agreed, definitely. Taylor says, college is a business. Literally, I will not shut up during that. Get ready for it. I am ready for it because I don't think any of us is going to shut up during that. Because we've had definitely some experiences in that area. So yeah, let's go back to our discussion questions, unless there was anything else.
Another way that it affects on the small scale person to person, I feel like they do a lot of propaganda in movies and television shows.
In
I think they've
commercials,
talked
for
about
sure.
commercials, yeah. They're always like the good guy, like
Mhm.
good guy military.
I remember, and these might still be around, but I remember commercials advertising the Marines, especially because
The Let's Roll ones.
there were those, but there were the ones where they were like showing different examples of people demonstrating their worth or their fortitude, and basically the commercials reframing it to being like, well, why not demonstrate your worth and fortitude in being associated with, this institution, right?
I always remember the people jumping out of the planes and stuff, and like, I am Army strong, and
Yeah. Hmm.
like I
Well,
am
and
Army of one.
I think
Like,
it comes
yes, you're
back.
the only person in the military.
Right. It comes back to, like, I mean, it's an appeal to individuality, which is definitely very significant now, right? But it's also, in a way, an extension of what many define as the American dream. Like, the ultimate American dream, many would argue, would be to do something to benefit your country in this large institution, right? Like, protect your fellow man, protect your families, your property, your freedom, right? So let's see. Taylor says the Avenger movies did a pretty good job of questioning the ethics of military. Definitely. The entire Star Trek franchise also does that too. This, like, Taylor, I want to frame it and just put it on my wall. Just remind myself that every day.
Taylor's on fire tonight.
Yes. But so, like, that was a really good example. Um I think I can't think of any other ones. Can you think of any other ones?
No, I can't. Those were some good ones, though.
I agree. So let's go on. Oh, Igny's on. Hi, Igny. It's good to see you.
Hi, Igni.
So let's go to question number 2. So, like, how does the military industrial complex affect the country on a large scale? I don't think we've covered that one yet, have we?
No, we haven't. We're just getting to that. We're starting to move into a bigger scale. So we're moving from the microcosm of individual into like the bigger scale of like the country.
I love
So,
the word microcosm. Like, such a great word. Anyway.
but yeah, so it definitely eats up part of our yeah, budget. Budget is a big one. Uh, it eats up education budget. It eats up just our just our budget, our healthcare budget. It just eats up the budgets that we would use for other things. Um, it, we could literally house the homeless for a year on the budget, and do the education system, do healthcare for everyone in a year, and have leftover money for what we do with the military, but and fund the arts and do all this stuff, but instead it goes to the military for our defense budget. And who knows within the defense budget, because it's so ephemeral and just kind of amorphous. They don't even know where all the money goes.
Oh yeah, it's
There
this
was
very large nebulous thing. And
there
I
was
think oh, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think largely what powers that need to have big military is the need for us to use that as a talking point when it comes to looking at international relations, right? Like we have the biggest military, therefore we must have the biggest influence, or we have like the strongest voice at the table because we have this large imposing force. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But anyway, that's I just wanted to add that.
But there was an article recently done within the last year that said even the Pentagon doesn't even know where all the money goes. They're actually not even quite sure that, like, probably about 225 million to almost $250 million of the military budget. They weren't even sure where it was going or what it was being spent on. They couldn't actually like put a definitive like number on like where that money was actually being used for. Like it was just being lost. And like
That
they
yeah. And was that intentional? Like was it intentional to say that?
they just
Or
they just were like, well, like because Congress was like, well, where are you spending this money on? And they were kind of like,
that is very unsettling.
eh.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Oh, Taylor, like I literally read the comments, Taylor, and I tried so hard to not snort. Our budget now makes us have smalting energy. I think you're referring to like education budget, right? So true. It is interesting. I know in past videos we've talked about the devaluing of education, right? And undoubtedly we're going to be talking about that in the next episode too. But if we compare institutions, the military versus education, we can see the devaluing taking place even in day-to-day conversation. And for example, like regardless whatever happens with the military, whatever is done with the military is always looked at with reverence and with respect. And and and, and don't get me wrong, like I think that there should definitely be respect and reverence for the military, but there used to be also a respect and reverence for education, for teachers, for that as an institution, but now we see a distinct difference between the two. Like, I mean, for example, what David said, yet they say teachers in schools don't know how to spend money right, right? Because what we get paid should be regulated in how we use it. So, like, it's interesting. Like, you will see that one of these institutions is treated as though it has no flaws to it, whereas the other institution is depicted as being nothing but flawed.
And they make K-12 teachers pay for their own school supplies. It's so bad. Like, I mean, like because the budgets are so small, like on a scale of the schooling, that they only give a certain amount to the school and they won't give it to the teachers to buy the supplies for a classroom. They'll only pay for a certain amount, so they won't even let teachers buy their own supplies. So you have teachers buying their own supplies. So like so you hear things like, we don't know where this money is going. You kind of go, are you kidding me? Like, this is ridiculous. You hear about like the military going, we don't know where this money is going. We're spending it on this nebulous like big, bomber plane, which may cost 100 $100 million or something ridiculous. Like, they don't even know how much it costs. And then you have a school teacher buying their own supplies, and it's like, it just, ugh,
Right.
ugh, ugh.
Yep, I agree with that on the frustration aspect too. And as David says, it takes no time to devalue respect for education. Look at people in the pandemic treating teachers as neurotic and selfish, when months ago they said, wow, these teachers are so selfless for doing what they do. Yes. Um, oh, but what do they need the supplies for? All they do is teach kids. Like, it's like, I'm
I mean,
glad that
that's
you.
sarcasm, but
Oh yeah, like I think it's interesting that you mentioned the whole pandemic and how teachers are treated too, because honestly, we're just treated like we're glorified babysitters. Like, people assume that that's all we do, but that's for next episode. Like, my bad. I was the one that caused us to have a digression again, because I was comparing two institutions and the varying respect levels of those institutions. So, but no, David, never shut up, because I think everyone who comments on these videos have phenomenal thoughts to add and questions, and we value that a lot.
yes, we do.
We love you guys.
Yes, that's why you're here.
Um,
So another way it affects the country is personal contracts with companies that blend the line between commerce and the government.
yep.
I lived in Seattle for a while, and Boeing was one of the biggest contractors, and you definitely felt the presence of Boeing around. They were always hiring, and you could always get a job at Boeing if you really wanted to work at Boeing. You just had to commute out of Seattle down to Renton,
Hmm.
uh, and it it was always, Boeing was one of like the last few companies that was around during the 70s and 80s, I think it was, whenever it was like Boeing kind of saved Seattle when it was like kind of down and out. It was like, yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I had mixed feelings about Boeing because it was it was, one of those companies that, like, really worked hard to get those government contracts.
Yeah. Exactly. It's interesting that you mentioned that institution or that company, because I mean, we've seen in this pandemic how certain companies can be adapted to produce different product for different situations, correct? And in the past, we've seen examples of that in the military. For example, in the past, like, there were like automobile industry, like, companies who were adapted to produce materials for military purposes, so on and so forth. So I think that kind of adds on to that what you were talking about, Ari, the fact that, like, that is how um, it can affect our country on a grander scale when it comes to resources.
Yeah, it may have been Yakima. I can't remember what city they were in. They were just outside of Seattle, though. But yeah, it was just like you had to commute to get down there, and it was just this like tiny little town, and all it was Boeing. And yeah, it was like they worked out of a warehouse, and it was this giant warehouse, and they built military planes, and it was so weird. And I don't know, I always had mixed feelings about it because I worked in real estate, and like they didn't own the building.
Yeah. It's interesting. David just mentioned another way, the terrible way the VA takes care of people when they come back. They lose paperwork. They give you the runaround, anything to avoid taking care of people with injuries or PTSD.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another extension of military industrial complex. Like, we're eager to provide resources for people if they're going in, but when they come out of it, it's kind of just ignored or kind of painted as though it's not as significant, right? Like we've used these people as these resources, so why should there be anything else invested in them afterward? Interesting. And then Taylor said that my non-war veteran grandfather gets paid out the ass with VA benefits. Interesting. Hmm. There's definitely there's definitely inconsistencies, right? And I think it's like those inconsistencies are easy to get away with because it's so big. It gets lost in all of it. Hmm. So, shall we move on to our next question, Ari? How it affects the world as a whole? How does the
Oh yeah.
military-industrial conflict? I think we can definitely connect that with the following question that we have too about like potential wars and conflicts. Because I just realized we're at 50 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. So how does the military affect the world, and what war might we get into next? What is the next possible conflict coming up?
Well, I really think that, I mean, we affect the world because like we're very conscious of the resources in the world, and there is a certain benefit to having access to those resources for us financially. So wherever the resources are, I firmly believe that that could be where conflicts take place or continue to take place as we consider, say, like the Middle East, for example.
Iraq, yeah,
Um,
and Afghanistan,
right.
where the oil fields are.
I mean, and you can still see that like we still have involvement in those areas, where we still have influence in those areas. I think that's mostly where the concentration will be with regard to, those types of things.
hmm Um, yeah, I was also thinking because we did in January assassinate a general in Pakistan.
Hmm. Wait, was
Uh,
it Pakistan or Iran?
it was Pakistan, I think. I'm pretty sure it was Pakistan, wasn't it?
I could have swore it was Iran because I remember it was.
Um,
Yeah, let's research that really quickly. David says it was Iranian. Yeah. Well, because I remember it was Iran
was
because,
it Iranian?
well, because like our relationship with Iran has always been very much on very unstable ground, right? So like
It
that
was
actually.
Iranian. I'm wrong. It was
Well, the truth
Iranian.
is,
It was
well,
Qasim Soleimani.
the truth is we've had involvement in many of those different countries, right? So it's sometimes difficult because it's so big and so vast to determine what provoked the involvement, what was the motivation behind said involvement, right? So yeah, I think definitely when it comes to like you mentioned in your notes, like policing the world, like our need to be the stabilization force. And I think that like I mean I think that's significant sometimes, but we've also had instances where that desire for stabilization has backfired entirely,
hmm
right? And arguably that's exactly what happened in the Middle East as well, right? Like our goal was to like I do believe a lot of it was retaliation in light of 9/11, of course, but also the accessibility to resources. And conveniently, during that same accessibility to resources, we were disempowering a dictator who was in power, right? So, like, there were a lot of different variables that kind of made the situation convenient for us to appear as though we are the positive force trying to make a difference in the world. when really that isn't always the case. Was that a motorcycle I heard in the background? Wow.
No, it was a plane in my
Oh,
background.
whatever. Like, it sounded loud.
Yeah, it was really loud. No, um,
Oh, Taylor. The most important question I have tonight is how the world going is going to be changed by Donny's book, and therefore the MIC will fall and rainbows will fill the sky. In an ideal world, a book of poems would have that level of impact, but I highly I highly doubt that will happen. But yeah, like if you've watched my last video, like my book got selected for publication, so I've been definitely living this high over the past week for that. So, but so let's see, were there any other
what about
questions you
North
want?
Korea or Syria?
I I see, okay. I know for Syria, it's also a question of resources, but for North Korea, I don't think that they would have like any resources that we would want or need.
But it might be just Trump, like, if Trump gets reelected, like, he just kinda, like, throws his weight around and he just, like, gets in a dick waving match with North Korea, and he just is like, "You know what? I'm just gonna, like, have it off with North Korea."
Sorry, that broke me for a second. That's a fair question. Um, North Korea is another situation where it's another very nebulous relationship, or let's just say, like, just this standoffishness that there seems to be.
I feel like North Korea is about to have a coup where his younger sister takes over the country from what?
Interesting. That would be interesting. I don't know though. Like I don't know if that would happen. It's possible because I know like when we didn't see Kim Jong Un for a long time, like people were speculating like, well, what happened to him? Like, is there being a shift in power? So
She would be a better first leader than he would.
I that's a hard question. Like I don't know if David, that comment.
You guys are on fire tonight. You guys are like perfect.
You guys are breaking me left and right tonight. Maybe that's a good way for us to finish off on a laughing note, right? Because honestly, looking at the rest of our questions, I think we've touched on many of these. The only thing that we haven't really talked about would be like
The use
the
of
use
drones
of
and torture.
the yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
You could talk about torture, yeah.
Okay. So go
Uh,
for it.
so so we were talking about torture amongst ourselves. Um, and we were talking about because during George W. Bush's tenure, torture was like a huge deal. And we thought like maybe it was kind of like just sort of like just a part of the military industrial complex. And it went away for a while during the Obama years. But Trump was talking about using it as like an acceptable form of punishment. And we haven't seen like use of it from military leaders yet. Um, uh, but I just like like I'm just thinking like, is it coming back? Like I'm just so like concerned about it being used from like but I'm just so concerned like that Trump is like authorizing the use of torture from
Or
like
could.
in like on like Gitmo and undocumented citizens like being held in cages and or like in Afghanistan and Iraq, like they're using it, or like that they're talking about using it, or that it's like going to be used, and like that it's just like part of the military industrial complex, and like that we're just not hearing about it yet because we don't have like um and that
See,
it's just like an acceptable part of the military industrial complex, and that we're just not doing anything about it because we don't have journalists that are ingratiated like they were in the George W. Bush years, and that they're not reporting on it anymore,
well, I
and that
mean, we
nobody's
look
talking
at
about it.
if we look at journalism right now, like it's just being continuously villainized, right? And like I really do think it's dangerous to be a journalist during these times. And do I know if torture is being used or not? Like Taylor says, of course it is. I think that it's entirely possible. But what really scares me the most, along with that, is the fact that it could be just so easily justified by the powers that be, you know? Because right now, like literally, like racism is being justified, hate speech is being justified, and those who support the people who think this are also given justification for them having those very troubling stances. So there's just this very scary thought process in this country right now where like atrocities can happen, but people kind of just are like, oh, that's nothing. If it doesn't affect me, like it's not a big deal type of mentality.
Right. And so like I am especially concerned about like undocumented citizens right now because like nobody like we just don't hear about like what's happening to them.
Hmm.
So we just have like
Yeah.
no idea like what's going on with them.
On a stream, honey. Sorry. But yeah, yeah.
So like we just kind of have to like speculate, and like I just I really like am concerned, like really heavily concerned about what's happening because like nobody's like talking about it.
Well, it's like the added problem right now is that if anything is talked about, it gets so quickly swept under the rug in lieu of something else,
Right.
right? Like all that has to happen is a politician tweet something or a president tweet something, and that kind of becomes the central story that's being focused on. And because of that atrocity, like everything else gets dismissed entirely. And that, like, I think that could also be partially a concern I have about the media too. But if we all come back down to it, it's rhetorical manipulation at the end of the day too, because those in power definitely know how to guide the conversation in the way that they want to have happen,
I
you know.
just like I kind of just want to get them free if possible, or like
Right.
like that's like my biggest hope is like free the people in cages.
Well, I would like to, I mean, I would hope that they would be freed, but I would also hope that people would start acknowledging like why it's wrong and why people who put them there should be held accountable. And like I think the freeing part is the number one.
Yeah, I think that like
Yeah.
we need to like kind of get some information about what's happening to them out. And I think
Hmm.
that that's like the first step.
Yeah. So so I like before, because we have, I think we can go on a few more minutes because there were a couple of different things for us to talk about too. because because we have a couple more questions. I posed the question of, does military glorification add to the breadth of the military industrial complex? And we've kind of answered that, but I also piggybacked a question that says, how has the commercialism of the military bled into day-to-day life, and how has it been damaging? We've already talked about the draft. I think we could add in the fact that it is also connected to toxic patriotism, which we've just talked about, right? Because like this need for self-sacrifice for the greater good, I think that could be lumped into the conversation about toxic patriotism. Gatekeeping regarding medical accessibility, that is another way that the commercialism of the military industrial complex has bled into day-to-day life. Meaning like the current like blocking of transgender people having access to medical um like like medical resources, so on and so forth. And then of course I also listed sexual assault in the military, which um so like people are not eager to criticize the institution despite atrocities that happen in it, because it's revered and respected. I've had people say, like, they're literally, I had somebody tell me once that women should not serve in the military because they could be sexually assaulted or raped, and that's why they shouldn't join because it would threaten the integrity. And I'm just like, you're worried about the integrity of the institution, whereas you should be worried about the safety and well-being of individuals. I know, kind of concerning, isn't it?
It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It's a very sexist view, for sure,
Yeah.
because it places the significance of something artificial and something that's largely uh, influenced and created by men over the physical well-being of women.
Yeah.
So, um, but like in a way, like, and I have in here like the fact that it is service like to the country, it's kind of painted as being these rose-tinted glasses that create acceptability where none should exist for atrocities like that. So now, if like, I think we should end on a positive note. Taylor's going to leave, tapping out early. Love you, my friend. You have a great night. Good luck for your ultrasound. We love you.
Bye.
So let's talk about a few ways that we can improve the military industrial complex. So the first one that I have is reallocating funding. I personally think that funding could be more so reallocated to education, because I firmly believe that education is the institution that helps undo lack of opportunities for most. It helps undo misplaced hate for groups of people. And if there is no misplaced hate, if there is no us versus them mentality, then the priority isn't placed as significantly on having a strong demonstration of power that makes us seem imposing to the rest of the world.
I think it's more complicated than that. I think that, we have built up this military and that we do have a strong presence around the world and that we have kind of gotten ourselves in this hole and that we are expected to, by other countries, to maintain this presence,
That's
that
true.
that other countries expect us to go and fix things sometimes when things are bad, that
Right.
we're asked to do things sometimes and we're just expected to like maintain this military and to maintain this like this empire. And so when we don't maintain the empire, it's sort of like we're somehow weak and we can't ever come off as weak in this country. because
Right.
we're so high up on this mountain. We're at the top of this mountain and there's nowhere to go but down. So like we have to always be on top and like stay on top and like stay on top of our game. And so like we're spending all this money to stay on top and like struggle on top. And so it's like we're kind of just like it's like Rome. We're just kind of like we're kind of stuck.
Yep. Hmm.
And we're just
And
we're
it's
just kind of
scary to be stuck in that type of position.
we're kind of scared. It's scary how we are. And like everybody criticizes us, but we're kind of like we're stuck right now. And we
Hmm.
need to kind of acknowledge the fact that we're in this place that's very unhealthy and that we need to like kind of unstuck ourselves.
Well, and this kind of goes to like the last one of the last like, I don't think any solution is going to be perfect, and the truth is I think it's going to require a combination of solutions. It's going to be it's going to take a long time to undo what's been done. And
It's going to involve a lot of letdowns around the world.
oh yeah, it will. And I think a lot of it focuses on continuing to hold the institution accountable by examining its imperfections as a means to help improve it in some way. Whereas people often are too afraid to have conversations about it, or they may not know where to start with those conversations because it is so big. Kind of like what we were struggling with, right? Like we were thinking like how are we going to tackle this topic? It's a challenge because it is such a gigantic nebulous topic that involves a whole variety of different things.
Right, because like we're expected to maintain this and it's such a beast. It's a beast and it's like,
How do we
you
wrangle
know,
a beast that makes us look like ants compared to it?
right. And it's so unhealthy. It's so unhealthy for us. It's so unhealthy for other countries. It's so unhealthy for the world. It's so unhealthy the way we've gotten. Like we
Hmm.
just need to like take a step back and take a deep breath and we need to like work on starting over.
Yep.
We
Yep.
do need to empower others to be independent, David. Like we just need to
Agreed.
like we need to like start empowering other countries to like take control of their own systems and their own world and their own and maybe it's not like nationalistic to say that, but it's like we need to like empower the world to like be independent of us
Right.
and to be more in control of their own system.
Exactly. I agree completely. I think that's a perfect way to even conclude this for the night too, because like I think in many ways we are an empowering force for the rest of the world. It's just a question of how we go about doing that.
Hmm.
Right? Do we empower through fear or do we empower by example and fellowship?
Right.
And I think we've lost track of empowering by example and fellowship. So let's hope that, like, I mean, if depending on what the outcome of the election in November, maybe we can, like, with the change of leadership, start setting something positive like that in motion. So register to vote if you haven't done that yet. P.S. Well, Ari, do you have any parting words for us tonight?
I think that we can just help other countries without having to like provide them guns and weapons and do like take over their elections and take over their whole system and like force our democracy on them.
Yeah.
Like I feel like we can do these things without like taking control and like forcing America on them.
It's like, this is a horrible analogy, but it's what I got right now because it's getting late. It's like being in a group project at school and you don't like the way your group mates are doing their portions of the project, so you take over what they're doing and do it for them.
And then tell them how they're supposed to do it, and then write on the paper, like grab their hand and make them write on the paper how they're supposed to do it.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. So let's hope that we can move past that. I
And
would
show a
love
little less control.
exactly. So, my friends, I think we're going to conclude for the evening there. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. Like you were saying earlier, this was a very big, challenging topic, but I think with your help, we were able to really come up with some really interesting talking points and answers to these difficult questions. So, which is always a plus, right? So next Thursday, if you tune in, we are going to be talking about um, education as a business. So hopefully we'll have another really good conversation. I have no doubt that we will, because we always do. So anyway, I love you all. You have a great night and have a delightful weekend. Bye.
Bye.